Greetings, my name is Peter, and I'm here to show you through a little bit of my method for the way that I create sounds in PodGo. PodGo is a bargain of a processor for guitar players, specifically who are going direct in places where they can't use an amp. For instance, I play in church, and using an amp on the platform is really a no-go for me in the very small church that I work in. So I want to show you kind of how I do this because I think there's some value to it. And quite frankly, even without snapshots, you can set up one tone that might get you through any song that might come across your way. So I want to show you a few things. I'm doing this in PodGo Edit, and the reason that I'm doing that is because I surveyed you folks, and most of you use PodGo Edit more than you use the actual unit. Everything I'm showing you, you can do either way. Another thing I want to mention before I get started, I have a number of guitars. I have a Fender Strat, a really nice Mexican one. I have a Korean-made Gretsch 5420. Those are very different guitars. And then I also have a humbucker-equipped guitar from Tom Anderson. It's kind of like a Les Paul with coil tapping. It's called an Atom carved top. They don't actually make this model anymore, although I think you can special order it. But it is my favorite Les Paul style guitar I've ever played. This is the one I use, and for most of my creation of presets. And I want to explain why. This is important before you get started. Pick up a guitar if you have one, and so many guitarists have one of these, that has humbucker pickups that also split. And you can make a preset that'll work well in both split and humbucking positions on that guitar. Chances are that preset will work very well with other guitars. So, with all that being said, this is the basic layout you get when you come to a new preset. There's already an amp and cab in there. There's an EQ block, and there is a wah, and there is a volume pedal. I use all of these blocks in every one of my presets. There are ways to do some finagling and get rid of some of these blocks. I'm not showing you how to do that because I'm never interested in creating a situation where my PodGo might freeze up on me, and I know that that can sometimes happen. But there are a couple things I do immediately. The very first thing I do is I take this EQ block and I move it before the amp. You're going to see why right now, because I change it to this thing that is called the Cali Graphic. This is a model of the EQ section of a Mesa Boogie amplifier that has those really cool 5-band EQs. If I double click on this, now I can see how that comes in set up. And right away I can tell you I cut the low a little bit. I cut this guy a little bit, then I really boost this guy, I boost this guy a bit, and I might even boost this guy a bit, and I don't know what I'm going to do with this till later. The reason I do this is I just got an extra boost pedal, and it's going to take my amp in a few minutes, and it is going to actually let me take it from just edge of breakup to a little more breakup, and then I'm going to basically have several stages of gain in one preset that you can control either with stomps or with snapshots. So I highly recommend this Cali Graphic EQ. I'm actually going to boost the 240 just a little bit because I remember that being something I liked, I think, with the amp that I'm going to choose. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this volume pedal and I'm going to move it after the amp and cab. And I'll tell you why. The volume pedal will affect how the amp distorts, and I don't want the volume pedal to do that in my presets. I can do that with the volume control on my guitar. So I have a couple of different ways to manage my volume, either with the volume pedal or with the knob on my guitar, which I find to be really, really useful. Another thing I always do right away is I turn on the noise gate. I know not everybody likes it. I actually just cannot stand noise. I find decay at 500 milliseconds is perfect, but this setting is too aggressive. So what I'll do is I can kind of hear, you can't hear this really well on the recording, but I can kind of hear through my speaker in the room a little tiny bit of hum coming in. I find where that hum starts to come in the threshold. Usually I go to about 80. Sometimes a little higher, sometimes a little lower. This way it's not so aggressive that it's going to cut off my tone, but it's going to keep my all that hum and noise from coming through. I'm going to have 2 blocks before the amp. I'm going to have 2 blocks after the amp. I don't know what I'm going to do with those yet, but I'll show you in a few minutes. First thing I want to do, and this is most of what I'm going to show you about the amps, I think is going to be the thing that is most useful to a lot of you, especially if you're just starting out with this excellent product. So there's a lot of amps, a lot of amps. This is just, I think this is all of them laid out, guitar and bass. I'm looking for a very specific amp sound when I'm going, when I'm making sounds, and I want to be able to go clean if I back off my volume pedal just a little bit. I'm sorry, my volume knob on my guitar just a little bit. I want it to be sort of edge of breakup when my knob is all the way up on my guitar, and I want an amp that I can actually change the settings on and drive into a little bit of overdriven territory. I want a lot of different sounds, and I want to make them with only one amp model, and you can. The jumps are the obvious place to go, like Matchstick's jump, which I like very much, but I find you really don't need that. You can actually save some CPU and use some of the simpler channels. My very favorites lately are the Matchstick Channel 1, which I have loved ever since they added it to Helix almost maybe 7 years ago. And I also really love the one that is called Grammatico. I typically like the bright one. I like this Grammatico GSG. And there's another one that's on here that is called Elmsley, and I'm looking for that right now. So the Line 6 Elmsley tends to be the one, where is it? Come on, where are you, baby? Here it is, it's this green one. This tends to be one that I find gets me into a lot of different tonal territories. When you double click, it's just set exactly as you see it right there. The first thing I'm going to do is this is an amp that I believe the master volume does affect the tone of, and I don't particularly like them maxed out. I'm going to take that to about half, but I'm going to turn this channel volume all the way to full, because all that is output of the block, and I want the maximum output that I can get on the block. When I selected that, it automatically selected a cabinet, the 4x12 Blackback 30. Wonderful. I don't like that cabinet for my sound. You can find the cabinet that you like for your sound, but right now I'll tell you that I like the Matchstick, both of these match cabinets, and I really like this one right here, 1x12 Grammatico. You see this little speaker, and you can see how I can drag this in 3D space. I can also use these knobs to adjust where the microphone is. This new speaker technology that has just been added is a game changer. I almost always like my amp at an angle. I almost always like either one of the condensers or one of the ribbons. My go-to tends to be the 121 or the 160 ribbon. We're going to come back to that in a minute, because I'm going to wait until I've set up my amp to finalize it with the speaker. But let me tell you something. If you have to do a lot of EQ to your sound, you're probably using the wrong speaker, or you just have to mess with these placements. I never have to add EQ to my presets to fix what's wrong with the amp sound. I find the right amp, I get it to sound good, and most of the tone shaping in terms of the final finishing of the sound is going to be where I put this speaker. I already know, by the way, I generally like them further away, and I generally like them right around there. But it varies. It varies from speaker to speaker. My low cut, I'm a little more aggressive than everybody else. I go right to 100. I go right to 100 hertz. And on my high cut, I know this is going to change later, but right now I generally go to 9.5. That's only for my clean sounds, and I'm going to show you how you adjust that in just a few minutes. So let's go back here, and now that again, I can hear in the background where my amp is buzzing, and it looks like I need to be at about 68. You can't hear that. That is the sound of the guitar. That's a single coil setting on my pickup. Here it is. I already know that that's not where I want this sound to be. It almost never is. So I'm going to go into these controls and I'm going to talk about all of them. I'm going to go backwards. Bias X changes the tone in terms of the bias, in my experience, only for really high gain amps. I almost never touch it. Bias changes how power is applied to the tubes in ways that I don't understand. You can look that up somewhere else on the internet. Excuse me. But I will say that bias is something that I set last, because depending on where I set this, I'm finding that I almost never like the default, and I almost always find a real good sweet spot somewhere in here or in here. Ripple is a defect in an amp that if you're trying to model and you want it to sound really convincing, you sometimes want. I don't. I also never want any hum. Sag, I generally set a little bit high. I'm going to come back to that. This is kind of sag is just what it sounds like. The amp kind of sags. It's working a little harder to try to keep up with the volume, and it almost compresses it. NFB is a setting on the Elmsley amp that I'm also going to come back to after I do some of this. Presence is your real high-end stuff that generally is coming through the power amp tubes from what I've been told. But presence is kind of, basically think of it as super treble, the treble above treble. It's something that's going to sound really good turned all the way off on higher gain. Depth is something that's unique to the Elmsley amp. It's not in most of the others. And we're going to actually figure out where that works best after we start to set up. These other things are pretty straightforward. Drive, bass, mid, treble, and master. These are all the regular amp controls, and these are sort of the deeper ones. I already know I want less drive because I'm setting up a clean sound first. So if I just go to 2.7, you can hear that it's breaking up just a little bit. And if I back off on my volume control, it mostly cleans up. Now here I am on single coil. It's a very different sound. And I'm going to go back and forth between those two sounds, as well as the neck pickup and the in-between pickups. But right now, that drive is right about where I want it. That's not the sound I want because we're not there yet. Sort of while I'm playing, I'm going to play with these knobs. Bass is not doing anything. That's because I got to turn this guy way down. NFB sort of changes the way these tone controls behave. Listen to what happens when I play with the NFB control. Well, let's put it up high. That's negative feedback, by the way, NFB. Now, I don't turn my bass very high. Why? Because I have a bass player. Too much bass in your sound, clean or dirty, can sometimes create problems. And by the way, I think that's just a little bit more broken up than I wanted to. So I'm going to take that guy back down to about 2.3. Amp controls are often interactive. When you reset your drive or your bass or your mid, and then you actually change one of the other bands, you may have to go back and change again because they're interactive and they sometimes affect each other depending on the model. So I don't want too much mid, but I want my sound to cut through, and I find that that's where a lot of it happens. Treble, I'm switching now, by the way, to single coil, and I'm going to check my treble out here. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. But I'm just going to find a place where I get a little brilliance and spank. Here's my neck in single coil. All right, so let's say I like that, and now I'm going to play around with the presence. I like my presence on my mostly clean sounds pretty high. I'm always changing my pickups, just messing around with them. as I'm actually testing my tones, because I'm going to use all my different pickup positions. If you're a guy that only uses one pickup position, this whole thing is easier. Now let's listen to the depth. I generally find, and I don't know if you can hear it, but as I'm playing and sustaining the chord, I generally find a place as I'm going back and forth where I really like it. That's really true of bias. Now that I'm mostly through where I want my amp to be set, I'm going to mess with bias. Wow, it's making a lot of difference. Do you hear that? I like the fullness of this amp model, so that's where I'm going to end up with it, right about there. It's not a completely clean sound. I don't ever want a completely clean sound. One thing that I learned very late in my playing, I've been playing for longer than some of you have been alive, but one thing I learned very late is that my completely clean sounds never come through the mix. And when you have just a hint of breakup, that's where you're actually in the mix. Now, I just realized that I have this EQ turned on, and I wanted that turned off. But I will tell you, just because I've messed with this Elmsley amp before, I know I'm right where I want to be. This guy here, we're going to talk about later, because we're going to use that to boost the amp. But right now, you can hear. And if it doesn't sound great to you, that's because we're using an iPhone microphone right now, and I'm not interested in creating a tone that you're going to be able to use by copying these settings. I'm more interested in showing you these concepts. Now, one of the reasons that a lot of you are using this edit program instead of the front panel is because, quite frankly, as much as I love my Helix and HX Edit, the Pod Go edit program is just, I think it's just better because they did it second. Someday they're going to come out with some new flagship and it'll have some new name and it'll be even better. But right now, I love using the Pod Go edit. There's nothing I'm showing you that you can't do on the actual unit itself. And for those of you, you can't see this, but my unit is set up so that it's in a mode where I see my stomps. Now, we haven't even messed with the speaker, and this is going to make a big difference in our sound. What you want to do is, again, play this and scroll through, and you can hear the microphone change. I like the 30. I like the 906. I love the 4038, but it's dark and it's hard to tame. I'm not going to necessarily go to that one. I almost never use the 84 because I like other ones better, and I love the 67, the condenser. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my favorite mic, the 160 ribbon, and you can probably hear it changes a little bit in tone, and I like where I'm at right here. Now, if you have no distance, it sounds kind of dark and boomy, and they've made it so that if you back it off, the volume doesn't go down, it just changes the tonality. I don't like it all the way out here. I almost always like it right about there. Once you know the amps and the microphones that you like, you're going to be able to dial this stuff in really, really fast. Now, before I go anywhere else, I want a couple other tricks I want to do here. I use the center foot switch on the bottom, which says A on your unit, to change a bunch of parameters at the same time so that I can use one amp to make more than one sound. The first thing I'm going to change is drive. And you might see this little triangle comes up. And then if I click it, it lets me select a controller. I'm going to select FS5, Footswitch 5. Right now it defaults to where the minimum is 0 and the maximum is 10. That's not where I want it. I want the minimum to be right here where I've set it for my clean sound. The maximum, I'm not sure where I want it. Right now, I'm going to guess. I'm going to guess I want it at about 6. Now, when I press the Footswitch A, which now has a light around it, it's going to change just that parameter. Watch the screen. I'm going to go to humbucking. One thing you might notice is there's a huge volume jump, which I want to fix. I also want to fix that gate because it's letting a little bit of buzz through. There we go. So now I have set that up, but I can set up several parameters on that one Footswitch. So I want to tell you a few things I do when I create a gainy sound. I already know exactly what I'm going to do with the bass. I don't even have to look this up because I've done this so many times. When it's clean, I want it right here where I set it. When it's dirty, I want it all the way off. Mid, I want to do something else with that too. So I'm going to hit Footswitch 5, and I am going to take the minimum for mid is going to, whoops, did you see what I did? I didn't quite hit the right. You got to hit right on this thing. So mid was about there. But I want the maximum. I usually don't go to the very max, but just under. So I want it right at 9.6. So when I go to my dirty sound, I'm going to turn, it's like I'm reaching over to the amp, I'm turning up the drive, I'm turning the bass all the way down and turning the mid almost all the way up, all at the same time. I also know that when I use my presence control, I want to do something similar to what I did with bass because I don't like it on my dirty sound. And now I've got it at 7.6, and the minimum on presence is literally going to be the maximum on presence is going to be all the way down. Finally, I don't want it to get so much louder, so I'm going to change some of that. And this is going to take a little bit of doing and some trial and error, but I'm going to take my minimum, my clean sound is going to be at 5.0, and my dirty sound, well, let's just try 2.7 for now. Now, this is my clean sound. I'm getting there. I want my volume on the dirty sound not to be quite that quiet. So let's turn it up just a little bit. We're on clean. We're on dirty. Hear that? Just between you and me, that's a little cleaner than I like it, to be honest. But I'm liking this sound, so we're going to keep going with it. You'll notice that it gets harsh and shrill. Again, you may not be able to tell through this microphone, but trust me, it gets harsh and shrill. There's one thing I want to do first before I mess with the treble. I'm going to go back to my speaker, and this to me is a game changer when it comes to using one amp with two different sounds, is change the high cut. I'm going to select that again. I'm going to assign that to Footswitch 5. I'm going to make the minimum on Footswitch 5 be 9.5 right here where it's at. And the maximum, you got to experiment for yourself. I can tell you now, well, it didn't let me grab it. I want my maximum at about 4.5. And this guy is not right here, but there we go. So right now we have our clean sound, and watch what happens to that high cut. A lot of the harshness, the shrillness has been taken out. An engineer in the studio will very often do a more aggressive high cut on an overdriven guitar than on a clean guitar, although sometimes they don't. If you could listen to some of your favorite classic rock distorted tones isolated in the mix, you might be surprised. They sound kind of shrill and harsh, but they sound great in the mix. You wouldn't change Jimmy Page's tone on any of those classic Zeppelin albums. Another thing that could be tempting is to change the microphone, but it makes a glitch. It glitches when it changes microphones. It has to because it's unloading and reloading a microphone. So don't mess with the microphone choice between one setting and the other. It just is not going to work out for you. So There's a few other things that I do here that I want to show you. I want to show you why I moved the expression pedal where I did. Let's say I want a delay. I'm going to put a delay right here. And I have a few favorites, but the one I use probably the most these days when I'm using only one delay is the tape delay. Transistor tape delay is what it's called. Now I like to use quarter note delays so that they're timed with my band's music. I always turn trails on. I always turn headroom all the way up on every single time I have the headroom parameter. I don't like dirty effects, but a lot of people do. Scale is at 100, but I get a little thickness if I turn it to 98. So I'm going to do that as well. I like Wow and Flutter right where it's at. I love the settings that they pick here. I don't like so much feedback. So right now, one of the reasons I don't use chorus a lot is because most of my delays have some kind of modulation. By the way, when I hit that pedal, it spontaneously went to one of the other blocks that the pedal is controlling. But it's going to control something here too. So once I know that, let's say I like the mix. I want it maybe a little higher. You know what I don't like? I don't like my mix really high when my sound is distorted. So I'm going to do one more thing here. That same Footswitch 5, which is already controlling like what, 6 or 7 parameters, it's going to control one more. It's going to control my mix. I'm going to set the minimum. Whoops. Where was I at? I was at about 42, I think. Let's say 43. I'm going to set this guy right here. And then I'm going to set the maximum to about 27%, about a third of the way down. This is because when I'm doing my delay, when I'm clean, and I'm going to tap it out here. Now when I go dirty, I don't want it interfering as much when I go dirty. You don't have to do it that way, but that's the way I do it. Finally, I'm going to do something else here. I'm going to actually assign this to a foot switch. See this guy here? This is where you assign your foot switches. You'll notice that my Cali Graphic is up here. You'll notice that my mono effects loop is right here. I don't use the effects loop, so I'm actually going to clear that, which I do right here. I say I want that to not do anything. Now let's go back to my delay. By the way, you don't need to open this little window here at the bottom to change your foot switch assignments. I just did it so you could see what was going on. So right now I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to click on this little triangle and I'm going to assign him. I always like to have my delay right here. That's just where I like it. You put it wherever you want it. And I always like to tell him, so that I know looking at the screen, I like to tell myself what exactly it's doing. So right down here, I can rename this, and this is now going to be called 1 quarter note tape DDL, which stands for digital delay line. And then I hit enter. This guy here is not telling me enough. Whoops. That's one thing you got to be careful of. I just messed up because I actually clicked. You can actually change this assignment by what you click, and I didn't mean to do that. So let me just do what I just did all over again. Happens to the best of us, right? So oops, I just did it again. So I got to select this. I'm going to click this guy. I'm going to rename it 1 quarter tape DDL. I'm going to hit enter. Now, I'm going to go back to the amp so that it doesn't do anything wacky here, but this mix control, I want to change this. I'm not going to click on the actual button because that's going to assign something, but I'm going to click here. I always like to make my drive control red because that's the color of amps. And then I'm going to change the name of this, and I always use the same name. It is drive/DDL mix. I always know that that button is going to actually control my amp drive as well as the mix for the DDL. I'll tell you the other thing, I don't like this up here. I like it here. So I'm just going to move the Cali Q graphic, and I also rename that. I call it Cali Boost. I sometimes use all caps when I'm feeling a little bit punchy. So now I have this set up so that I can just hit number C and it turns off my delay. I can hit, let's go back to the amp so you can see what's going on here. Oh, it's not going to stay there. There's my amp clean. And I'm going to actually close this window. And then there's my amp dirty. Now, maybe you don't think that's enough gain. And I agree with you, which is why we're going to bring this guy in. I already know it's not quite enough because I haven't changed the level control, but I'm going to change the level to about +2. Listen to what happens now. There's my distorted sound. There's my more distorted sound. I now have several different ways of making my sound change. I can go clean. I can add just a little bit of breakup by overloading the input of the amp. Or I can turn the amp to distorted, or I can do both. And I like to do one more thing, because sometimes I just like to have a gain pedal in addition. So we go into the distortion pedals here, and let me tell you, this new Pillars is wonderful. It is a great drive. However, my very favorite in here, and the one that I usually go to, is the Heir Apparent. I also use Timmy. I also use the Klon, which is called Minotaur, but the Heir Apparent just has something to it. There's a very subtle difference, but I like the 18 volt setting. I like just a little bit of presence. I like overdrive better than boost and distortion. You got to check it out for yourself. And I don't like quite that much gain. So that is actually happening before the boost and before the amp. Now I'm going to take that and I want to put that on Footswitch number 4. If you could see the unit, and I'm going to take a picture of this at the end of all this. I'm sorry, I didn't mean Footswitch number 4. I did that wrong. I meant Footswitch number 6. If you could see this right now, you would see on the top, you'd see nothing in the left, nothing on the right. This is if you're in stomp mode. And then you see the tape delay in the middle. And then across the bottom, you have from the left to right, Cali Boost, Drive/DDL Mix, and Heir Apparent. So, you can hear what the Heir Apparent does. One thing I love about it is, works well with single coils and with humbuckers. Also, it responds very nicely when you back off. I will sometimes leave this on all the time. An entire Sunday morning of playing, I will leave the Heir Apparent on and then only kick the other stuff up when I need to. So, listen to this. Here we have, let's get back to humbucker mode. A mostly clean sound. I'm going to take that level down just a little bit. It's not, I don't want it quite that loud. I don't want it to affect the volume as much as give it a little hair. I have an overdriven sound from the amp. I have a overdriven sound from Cali Boost or I can actually engage all three. Pardon my sloppy playing, I'm not trying to show off today. So that gives you a very basic preset that has a bunch of different tones. You've got 3 different ways that you can increase the gain. You can stack them as you want. You can add the boost and the dirt pedal. You can add the boost and the amp distortion. You can do anything that you want there. There are 2 more blocks in here, and if you're anything like me, you don't like to see a block go unused. And usually you want some kind of modulation. So we're going to add a modulation block, and one more time, they've got something newer in here that I really, really like, which is their 4-voice chorus. Their 4-voice chorus is really cool. But today let's play with Flexo Vibe. This is a newer effect, and this one I find does some really nice things. I also like it to be timed. I generally like my stuff to be eighth note triplet or quarter note triplet. Now, right now I'm not liking it. That's because the intensity of 10 is just no good. And you have to listen as you play with the controls, warp. I want you to notice that my Flexo Vibe is before any of these gain stages. The reason is because as the sound goes up and down, I want the distortion to change a little bit too. So if the amp is in its distorted mode, then you hear what I'm saying. You may not be able to hear it really well. But that's the way that I like to use it. I will then assign this guy to a Footswitch. Now I've got Footswitch 1 and Footswitch 3 that aren't used yet. So I'm going to use Footswitch 3. And that's going to be my Flexo Vibe. One thing I haven't done a lot during this, or I have done, but I haven't pointed it out, is every now and then I just hit Command S or Control S on Windows to save my preset. Save often. You just never know when you're accidentally going to do something or flick a switch, suddenly it doesn't behave right. And if you've saved since the last time you knew it sounded right, you can just actually go back to it. So now I'm going to turn off my gain. I'm going to turn off my Flexo Vibe. And here I am. Now I've got one block left. And there's a few things I can do with that. If it's got enough for a little bit of a reverb, I might pick a reverb out of here. I don't use reverb unless I use it for special effect for the most part when I play in church because my room has reverb, even though it's a small room. So I generally won't use a lot of reverb. But I do sometimes use it as a really kind of cool special effect. My favorites for those are particle verb and octo. So for instance, I don't know if you'll find this useful, but let's look at particle verb for just a second. I always turn trails on. I turn my dwell way down because it's really a long verb. And then I turn my mix actually a little high and listen to this. If I combine that with delay and I use the volume pedal to do swells, I might be able to create some really nice pads behind stuff in quieter sections of songs. But I'm going to show you something that you can do that's very useful. Let's get rid of this. That's very useful if you want to make a preset and you want to make sure that your volume is controlled no matter where your gain goes. I might just add a dynamic that's called LA Studio Comp. And I always put it before my delay, and I always put it before my volume pedal. I don't want my volume pedal to affect it. I also find that default settings almost always work pretty close to perfectly. Now what's going to happen, let me turn off that delay. I can change. See, I've got clean, amp dirt, boost, and distortion pedal. I can start adding them on, and this guy here will sort of tame them all to a certain extent and keep them from getting too loud. You can turn up your peak reduction if you're finding that you've got too much change in volume. You can change your gain and your level. This is a great way to finish out your preset right here. I'm going to show you one more thing. So we're done with this preset. You might want to give it a name. I'm going to call it All the Sounds. Because all the sounds that I need for a typical Sunday, I can probably make with this preset. I might want something different. I might want to change this guy out for another modulation and maybe make a copy of it or something like that. But whatever I do, I'm going to... I generally am going to, on Sunday morning, not go from one preset to another if I can help it, just because I want to make it a little bit simpler for me, and also for the sound guy. I want to make sure the sound guy's not getting different levels at different times. But I got one more button there, and if I wanted to, I could really maybe add just a little bit of something extra. So for instance, maybe this depth. Remember this depth here control? Now, remember, listen to how it changes. It's pretty subtle. I don't know where it was, so look what I do. I know that I saved this. I'm back where I want to be. This negative feedback will probably change the sound more. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find two settings. One of them is 0.69. And then I'm going to find a real small setting. 0.33. Watch this. I'm going to assign this to FS1. That's the one foot switch I haven't used yet. And at the, I'm going to have the minimum here, and the maximum was, we said 0.69. Sometimes I write these things down as I'm going. All right. So now what's going to happen is I've got two different ways of setting my amp up that are very different, aside from those three different ways I have of adjusting the gain. So at this point, I'm going to take another picture so you can see what the I'm going to change the color of that foot switch for NFB. So we're going to go back and we're going to look at this. Remember, this little button here shows you all this stuff. But see this? I want to make sure that that white doesn't tell me much. But if I change that foot switch color to red, I know in an instant, just by looking at it, that is actually going to control something that is dealing with the amp, because amps are red. I hit Command S to save it, and I actually want that on and every other foot switch off for the default when I come into this preset. I'm going to close this. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. I want to put that. See, now I saved this, so I should be able to come back. Yep. So it's exactly the way that I want it to be because I saved it. Anytime that you hit some button and you get yourself into a bad situation, if you're constantly saving like I am, you're going to have a much easier time of it. Last thing I want to say is wah. You are welcome to change out the wah. I happen to love the one that they pick. I actually think that this wah sounds pretty good. I don't like it clean very much, but I do like to take the mix down to about 75 or 80. So I almost always go to single coil. And I occasionally use wah, but not a whole lot. Anyway, that is the finished preset. It is done. Hopefully you got some ideas for making your own. If you want this preset, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to post it, and you'll see a link down there in the YouTube comments for where you can go to download it. I said I was going to take a picture, and I don't think I did. So let's take a picture. So as you're looking at that picture, and pardon me because I'm looking at two different things at the same time here. You got across the top from left to right. You have on the very left where you can turn that NFB on or off, and then you've got the delay, the 1/4 note tape delay. You've got next to that the Flexo Vibe, or you can replace that with whatever you want to use as a modulation. And then across the bottom, as I always do, I've got 3 different ways that I can change my actual amp tone. On the left, I have the Cali Boost. Again, that's just a great way to get a little bit more grit, a little bit of, it's a good, it might be a good lead boost for you. I don't know. And you might want to use it at slightly more extreme settings than I did. In fact, if I go back and I tweak this sound, that's just exactly what I might end up doing. And then you have that magic button in the middle that reduces the delay mix, and it changes the high-end roll-off on the mic on the cabinet, and it changes the sound of the amp 3 or 4 or 5 parameters at the same time with one click of a foot switch. And then of course you've got a place for your favorite distortion pedal. There's so many ways you can do it, but I have found that this setup works really well in terms of giving you a bunch of sounds at your feet without a whole lot of effort and difficulty. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this, and I will have some presets made sort of this way that are going to be available in Line 6 Marketplace soon. If you just want this one, it's totally free, and there's a link to download it right here in the YouTube description. Have a fantastic day. Go rock out. By the way, this is the beautiful Anderson guitar I used, in case anybody's wondering what's going on, where all those wonderful sounds came from. Anyway, thank you.